The air in the living room was thick with the cloying sweetness of vanilla cake and the false warmth of forced smiles. 70 years. I had seen 70 years, and all of them were meant to be celebrated tonight. The light from the crystal chandelier, the one my late husband, Arthur, had insisted on buying, it glinted off the silverware and the sequins on my granddaughter's dress. I held a champagne flute in my hand, its slender stem cool against my fingers, which were wrinkled with decades of kneading dough, laundering clothes, and soothing fevers. My son, Daniel, stood beside his wife, Isabella. He would not meet my eyes. He kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he has had since he was a little boy, afraid of the dark. Isabella, however, looked directly at me. Her smile was perfect, the sharp line of red lipstick, as bright and unforgiving as a shard of glass. She tapped a silver knife against her glass, the clear, high-pitched ring silencing the polite chatter. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Daniel and I have a very special announcement. A final birthday gift for our beloved mother." A gentle murmur of anticipation rippled through the guests. I felt a swell of pride. Perhaps they had bought me that trip to the coast I had always dreamed of. Isabella's smile widened, but it did not reach her eyes. As you all know, Mother has worked so hard her entire life. She has sacrificed so much for this family, for this house. And now, at 70, she deserves to rest. She deserves to be taken care of. She paused for effect, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing back on me. The silence stretched, becoming thin and taut. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. "That is why," she continued, her voice ringing with false charity, "we have made the decision for her. We have sold this large, burdensome house, and we have secured her a lovely room at the Pine Ridge Senior Living Facility. She can finally be free of all responsibility." The champagne flute slipped from my grasp. It did not shatter. It landed on the thick Persian rug with a dull thud, the pale liquid seeping into the deep crimson wool like a spreading stain. A collective gasp went through the room. The world seemed to tilt, the sounds of the party fading into a low, buzzing hum in my ears. Sold. My home. The home Arthur and I built, the walls of which held the echoes of our children's laughter and my own silent tears. I looked at Daniel, my only son, pleading with my eyes for him to say it was a cruel joke. He just stared at a point on the far wall, his face pale, his jaw tight. In his silence, I found my answer. The buzzing in my ears became a roar. The warmth in the room vanished, replaced by an icy cold that seeped into my bones. My legs felt weak, and I gripped the back of a velvet armchair to steady myself, my knuckles turning white against the soft fabric. This was not a gift. This was an eviction. This was the ultimate betrayal. Gift wrapped in a lie and presented to me in front of everyone I knew. That crimson stain on the rug, it felt as though the house itself was bleeding. As my world fractured in that crowded, silent room, my mind fled, seeking refuge in the past, back to a time when the ground beneath my feet felt solid, when the word home was a promise, not a weapon. It fled back to Arthur. I met him in the spring of 1974. I was working at a small downtown diner, the kind with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that played all the classics. The air was always thick with the smell of brewing coffee and frying bacon. Arthur was not a customer. He was the one who came to fix the perpetually leaky faucet in the kitchen. He had sawdust in his hair and a smudge of grease on his cheek. He was not handsome in the way movie stars were, but his hands, they were strong, capable, and gentle. He fixed the sink in under an hour, and when he was done, He looked at me with the kindest blue eyes I had ever seen and said, "A lady shouldn't have to work with drips and leaks." He refused payment, accepting only a slice of my lemon meringue pie. He said it was the best he had ever tasted. He came back every day that week, not for a leaky faucet, but for the pie. And for me. We fell in love not with a fiery passion, but with the slow, steady warmth of a hearth fire. We shared a dream, a simple one. We wanted a piece of land, a house we would build with our own hands, a home to fill with children and laughter. We saved every penny. I took extra shifts, my feet aching at the end of the day, my hands smelling of bleach and onions. Arthur worked from sunrise to sunset, his body tired but his spirit alight with our shared purpose. A year later, we bought this land. It was just a field then, overgrown with wildflowers and buzzing with bees. I remember standing here, right where this living room is now, with the wind whipping my hair across my face. Arthur wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "This is it, Amelia. This is where our life begins." Building this house was the hardest and most beautiful thing we ever did. Every beam, every nail, every pane of glass holds a memory. I remember the day the frame went up, standing against the sky like the skeleton of our dream. I brought Arthur lunch every day, sitting with him on a stack of lumber, sharing sandwiches and a thermos of sweet tea. I learned how to spackle and paint, my clothes perpetually dotted with color. Arthur taught me how to lay tile in the kitchen, his large hands guiding my smaller ones. We argued over the color of the shutters and laughed until our sides ached when I accidentally painted a streak of white across his nose. The smell of fresh-cut pine and wet paint is more nostalgic to me than any perfume. This house was not just built with wood and stone. It was built with our sweat, our hopes, and the unwavering certainty of our love. Then came Daniel, our beautiful boy. He was born on a rainy Tuesday in the bedroom upstairs. From his first cry, he was the center of our universe. This house became his kingdom. I can still hear the echo of his small feet running down the hallway, the sound of his laughter as Arthur chased him around the backyard, the thud of his ball against the garage door. I patched up his scraped knees on the front steps and measured his growing height with pencil marks on the kitchen door frame. Every corner holds a ghost of his childhood. The small chip on the fireplace mantel is from the time he tried to fly his toy airplane indoors. The faint scar on the oak floor by the window is from a rainy afternoon when he and Arthur built a magnificent fort out of blankets and chairs. I had dreams of my own once. I wanted to open a small flower shop. I had a knack for it, for coaxing stubborn seeds to bloom. But when Daniel started school, the fees were higher than we expected. And then Arthur's business hit a rough patch. Without a second thought, I put my dream away. The money I had saved for the shop went to new school shoes and textbooks, to ensuring Arthur had the best tools for his work. It was not a sacrifice to me then. It was just what you did for family. My joy was no longer in the thought of my own shop, but in the sight of Daniel's proud face when he brought home a good report card, in the relief on Arthur's face when a new contract came through. My world shrank to the size of this house, these walls, this family, and I thought it was enough. The years were kind, for a time. Daniel grew into a fine young man, smart and ambitious. He went to college, the first in our family. Arthur and I were so proud we felt our hearts would burst. We stood on the porch, waving until his car was just a small speck down the road, the sound of the engine fading into the quiet afternoon. The house felt so empty then, the silence amplifying every creak and groan of the old wood. Then, Daniel brought Isabella home. She was beautiful, polished, and radiated an ambition that was as sharp and cold as an icicle. She came from a wealthy family, and she looked around our home not as a place of love and warmth, but as a collection of outdated furniture and sentimental clutter. I saw the way her eyes slid over the hand-stitched quilt on the sofa, the way her lip curled almost imperceptibly at the sight of Arthur's worn-out recliner. I tried. I truly did. I welcomed her with an open heart. I taught her my recipe for lemon meringue pie, the one that had won her future father-in-law's heart. She smiled politely and said, "It's lovely, but I find store-bought is just so much more convenient." They married a year later in a lavish ceremony that felt a world away from our simple life. I wore a dress I had sewn myself, and I felt a little out of place amidst the glittering guests and champagne fountains. But when I saw Daniel looking at his bride, his face full of love, I pushed my unease aside. His happiness was all that mattered. The cruelest turn came 5 years after that. Arthur got sick. It started slowly, a cough he could not shake, a weariness that settled deep in his bones. The diagnosis was a punch to the gut: cancer. The world we had so carefully built began to crumble. The house, once filled with the sounds of life, became a quiet, sterile place, measured by the ticking of the clock and the schedule of medications. I slept on a cot beside his bed, holding his hand through the long, dark nights. I learned to be a nurse, an expert on his pain, a guardian of his last days. Daniel and Isabella would visit, of course. They would bring expensive flowers that wilted in a day and speak in hushed, uncomfortable tones. Isabella would stand by the door, her handbag clutched in front of her as if to ward off the scent of illness and mortality. She never once offered to help, to sit with him so I could rest for an hour. Daniel tried, but he was always pulled away by an urgent call from work, by Isabella's pointed glance at her watch. I told myself they were busy, that their lives were demanding. I made excuses for them because the alternative was too painful to bear. The day Arthur passed away, he was in our bedroom, looking out the window at the old oak tree we had planted together as newlyweds. He was so weak, but he squeezed my hand. "You were my foundation, Amelia," he whispered, his voice a faint rustle of leaves. "This house, it's you. It will always protect you." After he was gone, the silence in the house became a physical weight. Every creak of the floorboards was a question he would not answer. Every empty space beside me in bed was a cavern of loss. Daniel suggested I sell the house, move into a smaller apartment, something more manageable. Isabella called it an asset that was being wasted. I refused. How could I leave? This house was the last piece of Arthur I had left. It was my sanctuary, the keeper of my entire life's story. Selling it would be like tearing out the pages of my own heart. So I stayed. I tended my garden. I maintained the house, fixing the little things just as Arthur had taught me. I hosted holidays, filling the rooms with the smells of roast turkey and cinnamon, pretending we were still a whole and happy family. I poured my love and my savings into my granddaughter, showering her with the affection I felt was so lacking from her own parents. I thought that by continuing to be the steadfast, reliable mother and grandmother, I was keeping my family together. I did not realize I was just making it easier for them to take everything from me. I was so busy tending to the roots of our family tree that I never noticed they were sharpening an axe. After Arthur was gone, the house became my shield. I wrapped myself in its familiar comforts and memories, trying to ignore the creeping chill that had entered my relationship with my son and his wife. At first, the changes were small, almost unnoticeable, like the first hint of frost on an autumn morning. They were tiny cracks in the foundation of our family, the kind you tell yourself are just the house settling. Their visits became less frequent, and when they did come, they seemed to bring a restless energy into the quiet calm of my home. Isabella would walk through the rooms with a critical eye, her fingers tracing lines in non-existent dust on my polished furniture. "Mother, you really should hire a cleaning service. she would say, her tone a mixture of feigned concern and judgment. "It is too much for you to manage alone." I would just smile, the dishcloth in my hands suddenly feeling heavier. I had been cleaning this house for nearly 50 years. It was a rhythm, a meditation, not a burden. To me, her suggestion felt like an insinuation that I was becoming incompetent, that my own home was now beyond my capabilities. Then came the comments about money. Daniel, who had once been so proud of my thrifty, resourceful nature, started to adopt Isabella's language. "Are you sure you need to keep the thermostat this high, Mom?" he would ask, glancing at the dial as if it were a ticking bomb. "The heating bills for a place this size must be astronomical." They spoke of the house not as a home, but as a portfolio of expenses, property taxes, insurance, maintenance. They suggested I take out a reverse mortgage, a term I did not understand but which sounded vaguely predatory. "It is a way to get money out of the house without having to sell," Isabella explained with a predatory gleam in her eye. "You could use it to help us with a down payment on a larger place. Think of it as an investment in your granddaughter's future." I politely but firmly refused. The idea of turning my home, my sanctuary, into a debt machine felt like a desecration of Arthur's memory. This house was meant to be my security, not a piggy bank for their ever-expanding ambitions. My refusal was met with a frosty silence. After that, their visits were shorter, their smiles tighter. I felt as though I had failed some sort of test. The small kindnesses, the little traditions that bind a family together, began to wither. Sunday dinners, once a cherished ritual, became a source of tension. My cooking, which Daniel had once claimed was the best in the world, was now met with polite indifference. Isabella would push the food around her plate, mentioning a new diet she was on or a restaurant they had just tried that served the most divine fusion cuisine. One evening, I spent 2 days preparing Arthur's favorite meal, a slow-cooked pot roast with root vegetables from my own garden. When I brought it to the table, Isabella wrinkled her nose slightly. "Oh, Amelia," she said, calling me by my first name, as she often did when she was about to be particularly condescending. "So much red meat. Have you not read about the cholesterol?" She then produced a small plastic container of quinoa salad from her expensive handbag. The sight of that sterile little box on my warm oak dining table was a slap in the face. Daniel said nothing, merely avoiding my gaze and cutting into his roast with a dutiful but joyless air. My role as a grandmother, which had been my greatest joy, was also being subtly undermined. When my granddaughter, Lily, was young, she would spend weekends with me. We would bake cookies, read stories in the garden, and I would tell her all about her grandfather. But as she got older, Isabella began to intervene. "We do not want to fill her head with old-fashioned ideas, Mother," she would say if she overheard me telling Lily a fairy tale. Sleepovers were replaced with scheduled, supervised visits. My handmade gifts for Lily, a knitted sweater or a carefully tended plant for her room, were received with a polite thank you. And then, I suspected, put away in a closet, replaced by the latest electronic gadgets and designer clothes that Isabella favored. I was being demoted from a beloved grandmother to a quaint, slightly embarrassing relative they had to visit out of obligation. The disrespect became more overt. They would arrive late for family gatherings without an apology, their phones a constant presence at the dinner table. They would talk over me, discussing their business deals and social engagements as if I were not even in the room. I felt myself becoming invisible, a ghost in my own home. The final, cruelest cut before the birthday party was when they began to borrow things. It started with a small silver locket of my mother's lock. Isabella admired it, and the next time I looked for it in my jewelry box, it was gone. When I asked, she feigned ignorance at first, then said, "Oh, that old thing. I borrowed it for a party." I will bring it back. She never did. Then it was one of Arthur's old, beautifully crafted woodworking tools, which Daniel claimed he needed for a small project. It, too, never returned. Each missing object was a small theft, a quiet plundering of my life and my memories. They were not just taking things. They were taking pieces of my past, testing the boundaries of my silence, seeing how much I would tolerate before I broke. The morning of my 70th birthday dawned bright and clear. A soft, golden light filtered through the lace curtains in my bedroom, the ones I had stitched myself on long winter evenings while Arthur read aloud to me. I awoke with a sense of quiet hope, a feeling I had not allowed myself to indulge in for a long time. 70. It felt like a milestone, a landmark from which one could look back at the long, winding road of a life and, perhaps, see a clear path ahead. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps the path ahead could be one of peace, that the fractures in my family could be mended. I spent the morning in a flurry of joyful activity. The house hummed with my preparations. In the kitchen, the air grew heavy with the sweet, comforting scent of vanilla and sugar as my signature lemon cake, Arthur's favorite, baked in the oven. I polished the silver until it gleamed, my reflection looking back at me, her face a roadmap of the years. I arranged flowers from my garden, deep red roses for love, white lilies for remembrance in the crystal vase Arthur had given me for our 25th anniversary. Every task was a prayer, an act of love. I was not just preparing for a party. I was trying to summon the spirit of what our family used to be, to fill the house with so much warmth and memory that the coldness that had crept in would be forced to retreat. I found myself pausing in the hallway, my hand resting on the doorframe where I had marked Daniel's height. The highest mark, from when he was 18 and about to leave for college, was well above my own head. I remembered him standing there, a lanky boy with a shy smile, embarrassed but pleased by the ritual. I remembered the fierce, protective love that had surged through me. He was my boy, my greatest achievement. That love, I realized, had become a blindfold. It had allowed me to excuse his distance, to explain away Isabella's sharp edges, to absorb countless small hurts in the name of keeping the peace. Today, I thought, would be different. Today, surrounded by friends and the tangible evidence of a life well lived, he would remember. He would see me, really see me, again. The guests began to arrive in the late afternoon, their laughter and cheerful greetings breathing life into the quiet rooms. They brought gifts and shared memories, their presence a warm blanket against the anxieties I had been holding at bay. Daniel and Isabella arrived last, looking like a portrait from a glossy magazine. Daniel gave me a brief, stiff hug, the scent of expensive cologne clinging to his suit. Isabella presented me with a small, perfectly wrapped box. Inside was a single, elegant pearl necklace. "So you have something new to wear for your special day, Amelia," she said, her smile flawless. I thanked her, my fingers closing around the cool, smooth pearls. It was a beautiful gift, but it felt impersonal, like something a wealthy acquaintance would give, not a daughter. I put it on, the unfamiliar weight of it cool against my skin, and tried to quell the small voice of disappointment. For a while, the party was everything I had hoped for. I moved through the rooms, accepting compliments on my home, my garden, my baking. I felt a sense of pride. This was my life's work. The sturdy roof over our heads, the scent of roses drifting in from the garden, the taste of a cake made from a recipe passed down through generations. This was my legacy. I watched Daniel mingling with our old neighbors, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. He was laughing, his shoulders relaxed. A fragile hope bloomed in my chest. Perhaps he had just been stressed, preoccupied with work. Perhaps everything was, after all, going to be all right. The moment it all shattered came an hour later. I had gone to the kitchen to slice the cake. The sounds of the party were muffled. A pleasant naller, distant hum. As I reached into the pantry for the large silver cake server, the one reserved for special occasions, I heard their voices from the adjoining utility room. Daniel and Isabella. They must have stepped away from the crowd for a private conversation, believing themselves to be unheard. Isabella's voice was low and sharp, stripped of its party pleasantries. "I do not know why you are dragging your feet on this, Daniel. The agent said we have a cash offer, a very good one. We need to sign the papers on Monday." I know. Daniel's voice was weary, strained. "It just feels rushed. Doing it on her birthday." "Oh, please," Isabella scoffed. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard. "Do not go soft on me now. It is the perfect time. We are framing it as a gift, remember, a release from her burdens. We will be the heroes here, the dutiful children ensuring their elderly mother is cared for. It is brilliant." My hand froze, hovering over the cake server. The metal felt ice cold against my fingertips. I held my breath, my body rigid, straining to hear every poisonous word. "But it is her home, Izzy," Daniel said, and for a fleeting second, I heard a trace of the sun I raised. "Everything she and Dad built is here." "It is a house, Daniel." Isabella's voice was laced with an impatient, condescending logic. "It is a decaying asset full of junk. The property taxes alone are a fortune. That money, our inheritance, is just sitting here, rotting away with her. Think about the new house we could build. Think about Lily's private school tuition. Your father was a practical man. He would understand. He would want you to be smart, to provide for your own family. This sentimental attachment is a liability." A liability. Sentimental attachment. The words struck me with the physical force of a blow. I leaned against the pantry shelf, the sharp edge of a can digging into my back. My heart was pounding, a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. Then came the final, fatal wound, the words from which I knew I would never recover. It was Daniel's voice, no longer hesitant, but firm, convinced, adopting her chillingly pragmatic tone. "You are right," he said. The sound a dull thud in the hollow space that had just opened in my chest. "You are right. It is for the best. Mom has had her time here. She is tough. She will adapt. Besides, she has always been happiest when she is sacrificing for us. In a way, we are just giving her one last thing to sacrifice for her family. She will see it that way eventually. She has always been happiest when she is sacrificing for us." The world went silent. The hum of the party, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, and my own frantic heartbeat, it all faded away to nothing. In its place was a vast, echoing emptiness. He had not just agreed to sell my home. He had taken my life's love, my devotion, my every selfless act, and twisted it into a pathology. He had reframed my love as a weakness he could exploit. It was not just a betrayal of my home. It was a betrayal of my very identity as a mother. The sacrifices I made, which I thought were the purest expression of my love, were, in his eyes, just what I was for. An endlessly renewable resource to be depleted. I did not make a sound. I stood there in the shadows of the pantry, surrounded by jars of preserves and sacks of flour, the very ingredients of the love I had so foolishly poured out. A profound, glacial cold spread through me, numbing the initial agony and leaving behind something new, something hard and clear and unbreakable. The blindfold of maternal love did not just slip. It was ripped away, and I saw my son and his wife for exactly who they were, strangers with familiar faces, thieves planning a heist in my own kitchen. I do not know how long I stood there. It could have been seconds or an eternity. When I finally moved, my actions were slow, deliberate. I quietly placed the cake server back in its velvet-lined box. I smoothed down my dress, my hands steady. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the kitchen window. The woman looking back was different. The soft, hopeful light in her eyes was gone, replaced by the cool, resolute glint of tempered steel. The grief was still there, a deep, aching chasm inside me, but it was no longer a weakness. It was fuel. Arthur's last words came back to me. This house, it's you. It will always protect you. He was wrong. The house could not protect me. I had to protect it. I had to protect myself. I walked back into the living room. The pearls Isabella had given me felt like a slave's collar around my neck. I reached up and, with a calm, steady hand, unclasped them and slipped them into my pocket. I looked at the smiling faces, the festive decorations, the whole charade of celebration, and I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play. I saw Daniel raise a glass, his face flushed with champagne and false sentiment. I saw Isabella standing beside him, her triumphant gaze sweeping the room. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not adapt. I would not get over it. I would not go quietly. They thought I was a relic from the past, a sentimental old woman to be managed and disposed of. They were about to discover that the woman who had built a home from nothing but grit and love had not forgotten how to fight. The party was not over. It had just begun. And this time, I would be the one writing the ending. The days that followed my birthday party were the quietest I have ever known. The silence was different now. It was no longer the gentle, familiar quiet of a life lived alone, but a heavy, watchful stillness. I played the part they had assigned me, the broken, defeated old woman. When Daniel and Isabella came over, their faces a mask of synthetic sympathy, I allowed them to see me sitting in Arthur's old armchair, a photo album open on my lap, my eyes distant. I let them see the unshed tears. "We know this is hard, Mom," Daniel would say, his hand resting awkwardly on my shoulder for a moment before retreating. "But it is for the best. You will be so much happier at Pine Ridge. No more worrying about leaky gutters or mowing the lawn." "Yes, Amelia," Isabella would add, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can play bingo, join a book club. You will make so many new friends." They spoke as if I were a child, as if the life I had built was nothing more than a collection of chores and burdens. I would nod slowly, looking down at my hands, letting them believe they had won. I let them bustle around my home, pointing at furniture and making lists, discussing what would be sold and what would be thrown away. They moved with the confident, proprietary air of conquerors dividing the spoils. And with every condescending word, with every dismissive gesture, the core of ice inside me grew harder, the flame of my resolve burned hotter. They thought my silence was surrender. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for the prey to step deeper into the forest. My ally was not a new friend, but a ghost from the past. One evening, while packing a box of Arthur's old business papers, a faint scent of sawdust and pipe tobacco rose from the files. A wave of memory washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. I remembered Arthur sitting at this very desk, frowning in concentration, and saying, "If you are ever in real trouble, Amelia, you go see Frank Chen. That man's mind is as sharp as his chisels, and his word is as solid as oak." Frank Chen had been our lawyer and our friend for over 40 years. He had passed away a few years after Arthur, but I remembered him speaking proudly of his son, David, who had followed in his footsteps, A quick search in the old, thick phone book, its pages yellowed and soft with age, gave me what I needed. The next morning, I put on my best coat, the one I reserved for weddings and funerals, and took a bus downtown. The offices of Chen and Associates were nothing like the dusty, book-lined room Frank used to have. It was all glass and steel, with sleek, minimalist furniture. A young woman with a headset looked at me with polite confusion. For a moment, my courage wavered. I felt like a relic, a creature from another era. But then I said my name, and a flicker of recognition passed through the eyes of a man walking past the reception desk. He was tall and wore a suit that was sharper than any I had ever seen on his father, but he had the same kind and intelligent eyes. "Mrs. Miller? Amelia Miller?" he asked, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I am David Chen. I remember you and Mr. Spark Miller from when I was a boy. You used to bring me cookies when you visited my father." In his office, overlooking the bustling city from 20 stories up, I told him everything. I did not cry. I laid out the facts calmly, my voice even, from the overheard conversation in the pantry to the chilling pronouncement that my son and his wife had sold my home. I watched his expression change from polite attentiveness to quiet concern, and finally, to a controlled bass's professional anger. "This is unconscionable," he said when I finished. "Let me pull up your husband's files." My father kept meticulous records. Everything is digitized now. I sat in a leather chair that was far too modern for me, the scent of coffee and clean paper in the air, while he worked silently at his computer. The clicking of the keyboard was a stark contrast to the familiar sounds of my home. After 10 minutes that stretched into an eternity, he stopped. He swiveled his chair to face me, and a slow, grimly satisfied smile touched his lips. "Amelia," he said, and the warmth in his voice was a balm to my bruised soul. "Arthur was a very smart man. A very careful man. He loved you very much." He turned the large monitor toward me. On the screen was a scanned document, Arthur's last will and testament. David pointed to a specific section. "He did not just leave you the house," David explained. "He placed it in a protective trust. The language is ironclad. You have a life estate, which means you have the absolute right to live in that house, undisturbed, for the rest of your natural life. No one can sell it out from under you. No one." He continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "And here is the beautiful part. Arthur must have anticipated something like this. The trust contains a poison pill provision. It states that should your son, Daniel, attempt to forcibly remove you from the home or coerce you into a sale against your will, his inheritance is voided. Completely. His entire share of the estate would be immediately redirected to the city's Historical Preservation Society." I stared at the screen, the black and white text blurring before my eyes. Arthur. My Arthur. Even from beyond the grave, he was protecting me. He had seen the potential for greed in his own son, and had quietly, carefully, built me a fortress of legal protection. The love I thought was lost was right here, in the precise, unforgiving language of the law. "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. David leaned forward, the kind smile gone, replaced by the sharp, focused look of his father. "We do nothing," he said. "For now. We let them proceed. We let them sign the contracts. We let them promise the money to the buyer. We let them believe they have won. Their arrogance is their weakness. They have not consulted a real lawyer because they assume you are a helpless old woman who would not know her rights. We will let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff. And then, at the moment of my choosing, we will give them a little push." I walked home from the bus stop that afternoon, the crisp autumn air feeling clean and new in my lungs. For the first time in a long time, my shoulders were not stooped with the weight of grief, but squared with purpose. I looked at my house, its windows glowing in the afternoon sun, and it no longer seemed like a tomb of memories. It was my castle, and I was ready to defend it. That evening, when Daniel called to tell me they had set a closing date for the sale in 2 weeks, I did not argue. I simply said, in a quiet, tired voice, "That is fine, dear. Whatever you think is best." After the door slammed shut behind Isabella, the silence that fell was profound. It was not the watchful, tense silence of the preceding weeks, but a hollow, echoing emptiness. Daniel remained on the sofa, a crumpled figure of a man, stripped of his ambition and his inheritance in a matter of minutes. I looked at my son, the boy whose height I had marked on the doorframe, and I felt not anger, not even the bitter satisfaction of victory, but a deep, sorrowful pity. He had not just lost a house, he had lost his history, his integrity, and his mother, all in one fell swoop. David Chen quietly packed his briefcase. "My work here is done, Amelia," he said in a low, respectful voice. "Call me if you need anything at all. My father would have been very proud of you today." I thanked him, my voice thick with an emotion I could not name, and walked him to the door. As he left, the last vestiges of the storm departed with him, leaving behind a strange and somber calm. I did not speak to Daniel. There was nothing left to say. The words that needed to be said had been written years ago in his father's will. After a long time, he stood up, his movements stiff and slow like an old man's. He walked to the door without looking at me, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He paused with his hand on the knob, his back still to me. "Mom," he began, his voice cracking. But he could not finish. The chasm between us was too wide, filled with the wreckage of his betrayal. Then he was gone. I listened to the sound of his car engine starting, the familiar rumble turning into a faint hum before fading into nothing. And then, there was only peace. The days that followed were a quiet rebirth. The first thing I did was reclaim my space. I opened all the windows, letting the crisp autumn air chase away the stale scent of deceit and tension. I took the small, packed suitcase Isabella had prepared for my exile at Pine Ridge and unpacked it, placing my familiar cardigans back in their drawer, their soft wool a comfort against my skin. I went into the garden and spent hours with my hands in the soil, pulling weeds with a satisfying ferocity, nurturing the roses that had survived the neglect of my grief. The simple, honest work grounded me, reminding me that life, in its most basic form, is about tending to what you love and removing what chokes it. I began to find joy in solitude. The house was no longer a mausoleum of memories but my quiet companion. Its creaks and groans were a familiar language. The way the morning light hit the kitchen floor, the sound of rain on the roof, the view of the old oak tree from my bedroom window, these were not just details. They were the constants that had held me steady while my world tilted. I had been so focused on being a mother, a wife, a grandmother, that I had forgotten how to simply be Amelia. Now, I had the time. One afternoon, I found the old, dusty box containing my long-forgotten dream. Books on floral arrangement, sketches of shop layouts, a packet of seeds for a flower I had always wanted to grow but never had the space for. I cleared out Arthur's old workshop in the garage, a space that had been silent for too long. The scent of sawdust still lingered. I did not clean it away. Instead, I brought in pots and soil and seeds, and under the watchful memory of my husband, I began to build something new, something that was entirely my own. My dream of a flower shop was too big for a 70-year-old woman to start, but a small business, growing and selling unique bouquets from my own garden. That felt right. It felt like hope. I did not hear from Daniel for months. Then, a letter arrived. It was not a plea for forgiveness or a demand for money. It was just a few short, stilted lines. Isabella had left him. He had lost his job. He was living in a small apartment across town. He did not ask for anything. He just wrote, at the very end, "I am sorry." I read the letter, folded it, and put it away. Forgiveness, I realized, was a complicated thing. I could forgive the boy he was, but the man he had become was a stranger to me now. Perhaps one day that would change, but it was not a bridge I was required to build. My life found a new rhythm, one dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by the needs and demands of others. I set up a small stand at the local farmers market on Saturdays, my beautiful and unique bouquets nestled in rustic buckets. People loved them. They loved the stories behind the flowers. I made friends with the other vendors, with the customers who came back week after week. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my family's expectations, began to expand again. It was filled with new faces, new conversations, and the simple, honest commerce of selling something beautiful that you had created with your own hands. One evening, I was sitting on the porch swing, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The house stood behind me, solid and steadfast. It had been the cradle of my love, the scene of my deepest betrayal, and the fortress for my reclamation. I had learned the hardest lesson of my life within its walls, that love, when it is not returned with respect, is not a sanctuary. It is a cage. And the most important act of love is the one you show to yourself, the love that teaches you when to nurture and when to fight. I was no longer a victim or a survivor. I was simply Amelia, a woman of 70, with her own home, her own business, and a newfound peace, finally and truly, in full bloom.